quiet residential street in an average American town. There's nothing unusual about that, you'll say. No, there isn't. As a matter of fact, this is the sort of thing most of us expect to have, sooner or later. And a weekend free from work, with a chance to take it easy in the afternoon. There's nothing unusual about this either. We expect pleasure. We like it. Over there on the drive, the family car. After all, well over half our families have a car, though not always the latest model. 1 to every 5 people, the statisticians say. About that. Radio, too, if you like. Any station you want.
Walker's going back. I don't think he has a chance for this ball. He's going to try for it anyway.
It's all part of the scheme of things. Even those of us who don't yet have it think of it as a reasonable standard of living. Running water? Who gives it a thought? You have to have running water, and you have it. And a modern stove. That's all a part of it, along with the refrigerator, of course. These are things that just go with the American pattern of living. Most of us don't think about them much. Want music? Put some records on a machine. Put on several. The machine's automatic. It will do the changing. Want more light? There you are. And if you should want to call a friend across the street or across the world, there's the telephone. There's a great deal more to this American way of life, of course, and it's all familiar enough. It's familiar in the home, and it's familiar in the larger community. The main street of any town is almost the symbol of America. That's where the stores are. That's where we go shopping. Candy and ice cream, buy all you want. Hardware, sure thing, a complete line. Shoes, all styles and sizes. Gas, oil, water, yes sir, and free air too. Movies, come early and get the best seats. Books, the library is yours, help yourself. Medical attention, there's the doctor and the hospital. Education, schools for everybody. But do you really think all this just happened? Do you really think there's nothing special about it? Just listen to these statistics. Listen.
Comparing America with the rest of the world, we find that of the world's total population, we have 1/15. 1/15 of the population. Of the world's natural resources, our share again is roughly 1/15. But of all the goods and services produced in the world, we in America turn out over 1/3. 1/3 of the goods and services. Those are the figures for the overall comparison. Now let's compare America with other countries in terms of what the individual can buy for a given amount of work in a normal peacetime year. In such a year, the average American worker for 1 hour's work earns enough to buy over 7 loaves of bread. In the same amount of time, an Englishman earns 5 loaves of bread. While an American worker is earning over 2 pounds of meat, a Russian worker earns only 1/3 of a pound of meat. Or, to take an item of apparel, an American, in a little over 12 hours' time, earns almost 4 pairs of plain work shoes. During that time, a Frenchman earns only 1 pair. In terms of average yearly earnings, we get this comparison. The white columns tell the story. We'll come back to more statistics later. Right now, the question is, why is the American income so much higher than the others?
A very simple example will help to answer that question. Here's a man making a bottle. He's making it by hand. Take a good look at what's involved. One man and a helper. And what's the output? A little less than 50 bottles per man per hour. Now here's another man making bottles, only he's making them by machine. Let's watch this. One man, one machine. The output, over 4,000 bottles an hour. Why is the American income higher? This is part of the answer. We've learned to use machines. We use machines to make our clothes. We use machines to grow our food. With machines, we lay down concrete. With machines, we tear up concrete. Printing, that's a machine job. Bookkeeping, that's a machine job. We've put machines to work in 1,000 ways, from stitching shoes, to stamping steel with giant hammers, to scooping up the earth 32 tons at a time. But it hasn't been this way very long, even with us. Let's go back a little. The scene is 1850. At this time, there were some machines in use, of course. The water wheel, for example. The wheel and the shaft. The gears and the driving mechanism were made by local craftsmen. This was how grain was ground in the America of 1850. But machines even of this type weren't any too common. For travel and for hauling, there was the Conestoga wagon, horse-drawn, lumbering, slow. For metalwork, there was the blacksmith with his hand tools and hand-operated forge. A hand process like this with hammer and anvil took skill. And it took something else. Strong arms and a good pair of shoulders. The story was pretty much the same with making barrel staves. It was a hand operation, slow, laborious, and costly. Shoemaking, more of the same. Hand tools, hand skills, muscle power. It took time, and it was tedious work. To plow your land, you followed behind a good, strong team of oxen. That was the scene in 1850. Let's see how it looks to the statistician.
To summarize the situation in 1850, let's see how the work was divided among animal power, manpower, and machines driven by wind, water, and fuel. Animal power, 50%. Manpower, 20%. Machine power, 30%. That's how the work was shared, with animals and men doing very much more than machines. Taking all the work that was done, what was the average per worker in terms of output per hour? 27 cents worth of goods and services measured in present-day buying power. That was our productivity in 1850. 27 cents worth of goods and services per man per hour. That's how it averaged out. What did that mean in terms of the standard of living? What did a productivity of 27 cents per man hour mean to the general scheme of things?
What did it mean? For the farmer, it meant long hours for a low yield. It meant crude implements and a primitive agriculture. To the housewife, it often meant the difficulty of cooking before an open fire, the fuel being wood that had to be cut by hand. It meant the problem of making clothes by hand, of cloth woven by hand sometimes. It meant that skill in sewing was a required household art. It meant the inconvenience of raising water from a well, water of doubtful purity sometimes. It meant the trouble of preserving food, as well as you could preserve it, in cellars dug in the earth. It meant sitting down for an evening meal only after a day of tiring physical labor. It meant that the food on the table was plain food, that the family often raised for itself. That's how it was in America in 1850. That's how it was when most of the nation's work was done by the muscles of animals and men. That's how it was when America's productivity was 27 cents per man per hour of work. And yet, times were changing even then.
Yes, times were changing. And looking back on it now, we can chart the changes in American productivity. 27 cents worth of goods and services per man per hour in 1850, but rising year by year, slowly but steadily. The 1860s, more sailing ships displaced by steam, steel taking the place of iron, and productivity rising. The 1870s, coal production up, more railroads, more steamboats, more steam engines at work, more furnaces and factories, and productivity rising. The 1880s, telephones coming in, more machine tools in use, more and better machines, and productivity rising. The 1890s, internal combustion engines, dynamos and electric motors, and productivity rising. By 1900, 50 years of steady progress. And as a result, how is the work shared now by animals, men, and machines? Animals, just over 30%. Men, roughly 15%. Machines, more than 50%. With the greater use of machine power, what happened to productivity? 56 cents per hour in present-day buying power. 56 cents worth of goods and services. That was our output per man per hour at the turn of the 20th century. 56 cents worth of goods and services per hour. More than double the output of 50 years before. What was the key to plenty? We were beginning to find the answer.
Put the resources of the earth to work. That was part of the answer. And in the years that followed, more than ever before, we dug into the earth to tap its reservoirs of power. The stored energy of coal could power our machines, and we clawed it out of the earth by the hundreds of millions of tons. And hidden beneath the soil from Pennsylvania to California, from Illinois to the Gulf, there was oil. And in oil from deep in the earth, there was energy to power the truck and the tractor, the automobile and the plane, the ship and the locomotive. And the power of falling water, that could do our bidding. We barricaded our rivers, impounding their flow of power. We harnessed a source of energy as bountiful as rain. We put the dynamo to use. We mastered electrical power. Yes, we were learning the answer. Prosperity rests on productivity, and productivity rests on power. Power and the skill to use it. Power and the willingness to use it. In the decades after 1900, we grew as never before, our output per man-hour rising, and with it our standard of living. And we weren't just building engines, we were building a way of life. Some say the machine took over, but what actually happened was that we took over the machine. The machine that created new industries and new standards of welfare for all. The machine that did away with some jobs, but in the long run made many more. The energy of the earth harnessed through machines. That was the combination that boosted our productivity. We became the makers and the builders. We became the masters of production. We became the shapers of the technological age. Power in the machine shop and productivity rising. Power in the factory and productivity rising. There had never been anything like it before. In all history, nothing like it. We in America had found a key to plenty. Only as productivity rose could our prosperity rise. And productivity rested on power and the machine. We built the greatest productive plant the world had ever seen. But it didn't all just happen. Investors, big and little, who put up the capital required to expand our productive capacity, they were all behind it. Men of science, research, and invention, they were all behind it. Engineers and technicians, men of industrial know-how, they were all behind it. Management, sales, and advertising executives, they were all behind it. And the millions and millions of Americans who make up our labor force, they were all behind it. That was the combination that gave us what we have. Let's see how the picture today looks to the statistician.
If we summarize the situation today, we find our sources of energy divided up like this. Animal power, 2%. Manpower, little more than that. Machine power, 94%. That's our division of labor in America today. And what of our productivity? $1.40 worth of goods and services. That's our output per man per hour today. $1.40 worth of goods and services. Let's compare that with 1850. 5 times as much. Productivity up 5 times in a century of achievement. And with the rise in productivity has gone a reduction in working hours from 70 hours a week 100 years ago to about 40 hours a week on the average today. And most important of all, per capita income has matched the rise in productivity. 5 times today what it was in 1850. These things productivity has given us.
These things and a standard of living without equal in the world. Well, do we take it for granted? Or do we realize how our output per hour, yours and mine, affects the goods and services we can buy, affects the kinds of houses we live in, affects the conveniences we can enjoy? Do we appreciate what productivity means to our physical well-being? Do we see what our educational system rests on? Do we understand what must be done to provide more recreation for all? Do we know how to offer youth an even greater future here on Main Street, USA?
Well, so far the record looks pretty good. From 1850 to 1900, we doubled our productivity. From 1900 to the present, we improved the rate of increase until today our output per worker per hour is 5 times what it was a century ago. Can we do even better tomorrow? What do you think? One thing we do know, all of us will benefit as our productivity increases. If we want more income, more jobs, more leisure, we must see to it that nothing stands in the way of technological progress.
Yes, we must all see to it. If there's a better way to plow the ground, we must use that better way. If there's an improved method of picking cotton that will increase the output per man per hour, we must use that method. If a machine can take the place of digging ditches by hand, we must use that machine. Wherever we have facilities that can be replaced by more efficient equipment, we must use that equipment. And along with the continued use of the old, where it does an important job, we must be prepared to make increasing use of the new. And always we must look to our basic sources of power. Today, oil, coal, and gas. Today, hydroelectric power. Tomorrow, perhaps, we will add the power of the atom. So how do you want it? Where do we go from here? You will help make the decision. You will help provide the answer. You in the shop. You in the office. You in the factory. You on the construction job. You designing dresses. You designing machinery, the record is plain enough. Productivity is the key to plenty, but we have to use the key. And on how we use it rests the future welfare of all the people on all the main streets in America.